So this slide here is showing the artifact of a starch crystal. These are slightly polarized, and I'm going to share with you momentarily about polarization. I think it's a very unique tool, and it's a tool that we as histotechs need to utilize more. And certainly when I teach residents and share with pathologists, I try to encourage them. You'd be surprised what needs to be polarized and what can be in helping make a diagnosis and or showing up an object. But these are starch crystals that do show up on H&E occasionally. Not as often as they once did, but on occasion they still do, sometimes coming from gloves. But later on in the presentation we'll see another set that can make the emblem of a Maltese cross when polarized. So it's very, very unique. Next slide. This is showing India ink, and we use a lot of inks today to mark margins and lesions and different sides of things for orientation under the microscope. And this one is showing the ink, and it's just something that we tend to overlook. Our pathologists and residents tend to do that as well. It sometimes can be confused as anthracotic pigment, particularly if it were in lung or some other area, but it is ink, and it doesn't come out very easily. And it's just used for marking, but it is considered an artifact. Next slide. This is tattoo ink, something that we see probably more commonly now than ever before. There are a lot of different tattoo inks today. We can find those that are very easily to remove. They're not exactly washable, but they can be removed very easily compared to the older inks, which once they're settled into the tissue and the skin, they're pretty much there for life. But this can be somewhat misleading. I had a case where a pathologist asked me if I would remove melanin pigment. That's kind of what he thought it was. So he brings it to me, and it was in, of course, a section of skin, and I go through the process of trying to remove the melanin pigment through bleaching, and with 1 hour and 2 hours and overnight and even up to 2 days. And so I finally went to him and I said, you know, this isn't melanin pigment. This is something else. Could you please ask the clinician or the physician that took this biopsy to see what else may be going on with the patient? Check and see if he has a tattoo. So sure enough, he checks, and the physician said, yes, this probably is tattoo ink, and of course it was, and we discontinued the process. So especially to younger pathologists and residents, this could be something that they need to get accustomed to. Next slide. Now these are sections of lymph node, and this is a fixation artifact. If you look at the edges there of the specimen, you'll see very darkly staining edges, and as you go internally to the specimen, it becomes a little lighter. Well, certainly these nodes, they probably weren't cut or opened up at grossing, and fixation has been allowed to fix them, obviously, and fixation occurs from the outermost part of the tissue inward. You can see some of the little germinal centers that are there, but this is fixation, and this is something that when we first started doing immunohistochemistry, we would see, well, let's not pay attention to the edge of the staining of this tissue because we know that's pretty well fixed, and the more internally you would go, you would have less staining or lighter staining, but this is fixation. So when tissues are not cut open as they need to be or allowed to have penetration of fixation, this could be an artifact on the outer edge that pathologists think, well, why is it staining darker here than internally, and that's a good part of it. Plus, if it's not fixed very well and your water bath isn't very warm and your tissues aren't processed as nicely as they could, wrinkles can appear, as you see in this other image here, and just doesn't make a very attractive slide for diagnosing. Next slide also shows a higher power of the edge artifact, if you want to call it as such, of the fixation. A very dark nuclear staining, and as it protrudes further inward, it becomes a lot lighter. Also captured in that image on the right corner is a cover slip gauze, and that happens particularly those of us who still may use manual cover slipping to have a gauze fiber in there, which can be easily overlooked, but if taking photography or pictures or showing, it isn't a very attractive piece. So you got a couple artifacts in one slide: wrinkles, fixation, and then even gauze fiber. Next slide. This is a section of muscle. It is called a contraction artifact that happens during freezing or fixation and can be avoided by using clamps. So when they take a muscle biopsy, they normally should use clamps and keep it clamped when they bring it to you. If not, then you'll see this contraction artifact here. It's just not very attractive. It makes it very hard to make a diagnosis, and sometimes may have to be repeated. But to cure it, leave it on clamps from the very beginning. It's not adipose tissue, and it's not a spider web. It's not a lot of vacuoles, but this is just plain OCT compound we use when we're freezing tissues in a cryostat. And this is OCT that was on the left on the slide, and I think some staining occurred, and that's why it kind of outlined the format of it, but OCT compound. These are calcium carbonate crystals. Now, there's probably not very many people that still make up formalin, but there could be, and on occasion we do see these crystals. Calcium carbonate was used to buffer formalin. There are many buffers available, and this was one. And these are crystals that are partially polarized in this section of brain. And polarization would show them up very nicely. And let's go to the next slide, Alicia. I want to go ahead now and talk just a minute about polarization. To show you what a polarizer is, because I'm not sure if you're aware, but polarizer is usually attached to a microscope. The analyzer goes under the head, and the polarizer part goes above the light source. Alicia, if you click the slide again, it'll appear another image. This is how the actual polarizer works. So you have a crystal in the middle, and you have the analyzer above it and the polarizer beneath it, and you turn them, and you get polarization. Now, these cost about $500, but I'm going to give you 3 examples. For example, you can have the Volkswagen model, the Buick model, or the Rolls-Royce model. Now, the Volkswagen model, you can go to your local Walgreens or CVS pharmacy and buy you an inexpensive pair of Polaroid sunglasses and take them out of the frames, and you have a nice set of polarizers. You can also order polarizing sheets and cut them to the size that you need from a camera photography store. Those be probably about $10. So if you've got a little more money than that in your budget, you can go to the Buick model. You can order these from one of your supply houses. They have a nice little aluminum edge around them, so they allow you to hold them and turn them. And they're probably about $50. We'll do the very same thing. But if you have lots of money, like some institutions do, and I'm kind of using that jokingly, if you have about $500 you don't know what to do with, you can order the Rolls-Royce model polarizer that fits on your microscope as you see here. And all 3 do essentially the same task. We give residents we order sheets of polarizing film and cut them, and we give them to those. Why is polarizing so important? Well, not only will you use it in crystals, you can use it in forensic cases such as sand and paint and glass and silicon. It's used many times to see silicon crystals in breast reductions. We use it in gout crystals. If you ever get gout in the grossing area and they submit it for urate crystals, which essentially are the same thing, you want to polarize those to be sure that that's what they are. In cases of amyloid, when you do the Congo red stain, should polarize a birefringent apple green color. True amyloid will polarize, and you certainly should have one available for that purpose. And then if you just need some time to see collagen, if you need to see what true collagen is, true collagen itself will polarize. The nice white fibers will light up to be a very white color under polarized light. But there's so many things that you can use polarization for. Alicia, go to the next slide, and this is another example. Formalin pigment, for example. This is, in the H&E, you see this brown amorphous shaped crystalline material. It's formalin pigment. Formalin pigment forms when the formalin pH falls below 5, or when it's very acidic, or if you have a bloody specimen such as a placenta or a hematoma or something like that, or even a big blood vessel with lots of red blood cells, you can get formalin pigment. Well, many times pathologists just overlook it, but there are times that you really want to remove that pigment. But formalin pigment, Alicia, click your mouse again, will polarize. And the next image, as it comes into focus, is showing polarization of the formalin pigment. Paraffin crystals will polarize. If, for example, you have a slide and it probably didn't stain very well, just basic H&E, and you thought, well, what's wrong with it? We deparaffinized it. The stain is working. It has been. If you take the slide, put it under the scope, and polarize it, if you have lots of paraffin crystals there, then obviously the paraffin has not been totally removed, which will prohibit your staining from occurring, whether it be H&E or special stains or whatever. So I think polarization has a lot of unique tools, and we probably ought to try to utilize it as much as we can. Next slide. As I talked about the calcium carbonate crystals earlier, polarizing, they also will stain with a gram stain. So you notice here these crystals are staining gram positive with the crystal violet stain and the gram stain. Again, these are calcium carbonate crystals, gram stain. Next slide. Another pigment that we tend to overlook occasionally, if you're still using mercury pigment for whatever, and perhaps you're not, and I hope that many people are getting away from that, but things such as zincers or helis or B5, the most popular mercury fixative, these are mercuric chloride crystals. They are amorphous, brownish to black colored crystals here. This is quite loaded in this section. And go to the next slide, Alicia. If you also polarize those, they have a nice little starburst pattern in the tissue section. But maybe people are getting away from it. I sincerely hope that you are. There are many substitutes today to get off of mercury fixation. Next slide. This is an image of electron microscopy, and this is showing a tissue section that has the mercury pigment and the large round object there that's attached to a piece of collagen or fiber or whatever is mercury pigment. So I just thought that would be interesting for you to see that at the EM level. Next slide is people are still using a little Bouins here and there, which contains picric acid. It gives it its yellow color. Picric acid is the only solution still in histology that's used for both a fixative and a dye for staining. However, due to the safety of that, that probably should be something that's not ordered as commonly in a crystal form, but probably in either an alcoholic or aqueous solution. If you click again, Alicia, it'll bring up another image of Bouins. And this is a piece of uterus that fixed in Bouins, and you can see the texture of the muscular fibers there. They're kind of whitish. And if we go to the next slide, there are reasons that when you had Bouins and you had picric acid in stains and had to be washed out. Now, our earlier masters, when they really mastered this, you can still see in this image some yellow color. They really knew what they were talking about, washing for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever the timing that they listed. If not, if it was incompletely washed out, then even though you could see the stain today, well, under the cover glass in the slide file over time, then these crystals would form, and that's what you're seeing here are picric acid crystals under the cover slip. So again, if it says wash, there's a reason to wash well and try not to take shortcuts. Next slide. These are nuclei that are called nuclear bubbling. I'm sure you've probably heard of that. Sometimes your pathologist may come to you, well, these nuclei, they They have bubbles in them. They have vacuoles. I'm not seeing the nuclear detail very well. And Alicia, if you click again, it'll bring up another image. Well, this nuclear bubbling, as we call it, or vacuoles, you can see that some of the chromatin has been pushed away from the center of the nuclei up against the wall of the nuclear capsule. And what causes this is our friend formalin. It obviously didn't get enough time in formalin and then was proceeded on to the tissue processor to start perhaps in 80% alcohol or maybe a lower grade of alcohol. And whereas so the formalin didn't complete its job, we have now let alcohol taken over fixation, and you will find this to be an occasional problem, not always, but it's one thing that will produce nuclear bubbling. These are gas bubbles. We don't see them too much in human tissue, but we do see them on occasion with animal tissue, and this is due to alcohol fixation. And you can see the large white vacuoles here. They're just gas. It easily can be corrected. Just put them in formalin rather than alcohol. Now, this is a potassium dichromate crystal here, which obviously probably is not a problem any longer. Although we have tried to recreate this, and it just doesn't exist, so we figure that it's an artifact that has disappeared. We're probably glad that it has. But this is potassium chromate crystals. Alicia, if you click again, it brings up another image. And this is EM showing the improper fixation, or the things that don't get fixed and processed very well. This is not a very sharp, clear image. Alicia, go ahead and click again. And you're seeing in this particular image that's coming up is not a very sharp image of the tissue that has been fixed and processed very nicely. And then this is showing the H&E. It's very cracked appearance. It's not very well intact. It's not got the best of nuclear staining. And if we click one more time, then tissue that's been well fixed and well processed, this is EM showing you how nice the images are in the preservation and the detail internally of the actual tissue specimen. So you can select for yourself which would you prefer. Now these are a series of images that I'm going to show you here. This is actually a DNC specimen that was processed and heat was allowed to take over. You can see the nuclei even in this image are not very sharp. And Alicia, go ahead and click again. It'll bring on another image as we move to a higher power. You can see the nuclei here are very washed out. There's not very much of any nuclear chromatin. Alicia, click again. And as we see another higher power, there's just some areas are better than others. And one more click will bring us forward to showing the washed out appearance in the very next image. Just click one more time. Now, what caused this is heat. This was a problem that we had asked the technician not to fill the processor with paraffin pellets or flakes, because as you know, when they melt, the level goes down. And unless you go back and check this, then you're not going to have enough paraffin for processing a lot of tissue. And naturally, she didn't do that, and so only half the tissues got paraffin. This happened to be one of the tissue blocks that didn't get paraffin, so it sat in the heated container in the processor chamber for the duration of the night. We could do nothing, though I tried to use glycerin and formalin to revive this and use all kinds of basics to or alkalis to try to bring out nuclear detail. We just never were able to do that. So essentially, heat ruined this specimen. And that's why we always tell people, pour paraffin in to the processor so you see the level of it feel rather than melting it in the processor itself. I've always been a very firm believer of melting it in an oven. Maybe I'm a little old-fashioned. That's okay. Use a paraffin dispenser if you wish. But paraffin contains a lot of additives. There's beeswax. There's types of rubber and bayberry and all kinds of things added to help in filtration and microtomy, and they thoroughly need to mix. The chemistry of paraffin needs to mix well as it melts so that you have a nice texture when it's infiltrating in the processor, and then when you embed with it and cut, you get a very nice section. Okay, as one of our skin sections, not meaning here, but as we would see in life, we have a skin, didn't process very well. There's a lot of micro vibrations here. Alicia, click the next slide. And so very difficult to cut. Not a very pretty section under the microscope. Now, as you see, this section that just came up is very flat. It's got areas for you to see the epithelium, little areas of muscle, collagen, or connective tissue, and so forth. And what's helped this is soaking. Now, a lot of people are against soaking. They say it's very old-fashioned and whatever, and that's okay. It's everyone's opinion, but it's what gets the best section. The way that you can get away from this soaking is to optimally process the tissue so that you don't have to soak. But we are not quite there yet in a lot of ways. There are methods to do that. There are instruments to do that today. We'll talk about that momentarily. But to get rid of these vibrations and chatter, you have to reintroduce moisture back into the tissue. It's been over dehydrated in the processing. It's had too much alcohol and xylene, and of course it goes into the paraffin. And you end up with tissue that can be hard and very difficult to section and cut, and it pulls away from the epithelium edge and so forth. So soaking does help to put moisture back in it for ease of cutting. Next slide, Alicia. This is showing a similar thing. This is micro vibration. Some people would refer to this artifact as Venetian blind effect. It doesn't have an exact blind effect, but it's close. Again, this is overly or over-processed, over-dehydrated. Alicia, click one more time and you'll see a lower power of the same specimen once it's been soaked, moisture introduced, then it cuts very nicely. Next slide. This one is a section that has a lot of moth-eaten artifact. It's moth, M-O-T-H, and it's where there's been a very dull knife and the tissue has been pulled out rather than actually cut. Tissue that has a lot of hard areas are things like connective tissue and collagen. And many times the blade can just pull it out rather than actually making a nice section. Okay, this is a section of kidney, and this little area that you see, this left a nice little hole, and the tissue's kind of bunched up. This is where a bubble got under the section on the water bath. Happens to all of us, and so it wasn't caught. The section was picked up, put on the slide. The bubble was trapped underneath it, and as the tissue either dried or was stained, then that bubble popped and left this nice hole with the tissue somewhat pushed over to the side. Alicia, click one more time. Well, these are pretty common artifacts that you're seeing. These are some folds. You can see the arrow focused on it. Folds many times can show areas of micrometastasis. Little areas of cancer can be hiding there. So it's very nice if you can have a water bath that is very evenly checked temperatures and warm as it needs to be to match the texture of your paraffin so that the section lays flat. When you pick it up, you don't have folds and wrinkles. And this does happen a lot with skin and gastric biopsies. And here, of course, is a section of skin. These are pretty bad wrinkles and folds. And really, you can't make much out of epithelium. And that's what is a very nice area that they need to be seeing is the epithelial surface. And be sure there's no skin cancers or basal cells or micrometastasis hiding there under some of these folds and wrinkles. And click one more time. And again, you find this one here. It's just several folds and wrinkles there. These are common. They happen. We just need to strive to be sure that the sections get fixed well, processed well, embedded well. The water bath is the best temperature, a nice sharp knife. I know these are all variables, but that is what gives us very nice sections when we have quality controlled all of our variables to make it happen correctly. These are artifactual fungi that occur in many places. You can see here at the top left, these are some fungi that probably have grown in the either light green or hypo solution in the GMS stain. Sodium thiosulfate is the hypo, and when it's not changed regularly, fungus will grow there and then can attach to your slide and give you a false positive. The other two sections in the right corner and beneath it are mildew. These can happen when slides get filed, and if they're kept in a damp area in storage, which we hope they aren't, but if they do, mildew grows in very warm, moist areas and can get in the slide file and on top of the glass and produce this artifact. And if someone's not careful, they may think it's really on the tissue section as they focus the microscope objective up and down. These are a series of slides here. This is very old, and I'm only pointing out to you the mounting media is very aged and very cracked. Obviously, we may not use this type of mounting media any longer, but the slide is exhibiting that. At least if you click again, you'll see some of these edges. This probably has no meaning to some people, but a high microscopic image is showing you the deterioration of the mounting media on the edge of the cover glass as it's working underneath the glass to produces air. Air pockets get in and it's drying it out. The next image as it pulls up is showing you bubbles that get trapped under cover glasses, and they help to begin the formation of air under there and can help dry out the section. Then before you know it, it's all through the cover glass. And the very next one is showing you something that we call corn flaking. And for those of you that may have taken your Board of Registry exam at some point in time, or may in the future, they may ask this question. I may even have an image, but this is corn flaking artifact. It's where there's air trapped under the cover glass, and it begins to travel and dry out the preservation, and it forms this little image that we refer to as corn flaking. Next slide. There's some artifacts that we can't help, and those are calcium deposits that are internally, they're very small to see. You probably can't see them grossly at the grossing board to decalcify them, or they may just all of a sudden appear. And this is what happens. They tear the tissue. You can't get them out unless you pick out the small pieces of calcium with a teasing needle or something at the microtome. But this is a section of gastrointestinal tract, and you see the muscular wall and where the calcium was. It's just very unattractive. And it's helpful to the pathologist perhaps to know, because it could be part of the disease process, whatever may be producing the calcium in that area. But it's just not very good, and it runs your knife, and the section isn't very attractive. Calcium will stain very dark with hematoxylin, as you can see here, and you'll see perhaps in a few other slides momentarily. Alicia, click again. If you so desire, you may want to do a calcium stain, and this is the Dahl's calcium stain. The alizarin red S is staining the fragments of calcium here, a little orangey red color, and then the light green is the counter stain. It's not a very attractive slide. It's just demonstrating calcium, but you're not getting a very flat, smooth cut because of the calcium artifact. Next slide. So sometimes when we get specimens, we end up with something as extra added value. This is a section of skin, and around this object in the center, there's a lot of necrosis occurring. This is an H&E, and this little object that's kind of brown in color, Alicia, click one more time and it will enlarge the image there. This is a thorn. This was a finger that had a thorn in it and had to be kind of taken out. and you can see the texture of the thorn there is a very unique design. But because the thorn was in there and left there for a period of time, it's allowed some of the necrosis around it to occur. But again, that would kind of cut your knife blade or nick it, and you'd wonder what it is. And we just get these little extra things to look at. There's no charge. Now, this would be an interesting one here, and a lot of people get a little bit of a fun out of it, but we probably don't see a lot of people doing hand staining today, but there is still some done. And the manner in which we do it, we all have our own methods and so on. But as we would hand stain to move the rack from one solution to another, we may all of a sudden decide to scratch our face or our forehead or something, and we get little epithelial cells there. Well, this is dandruff. These are dandruff particles that have fallen off someone's finger or out of their hair or wherever into the eosin, and they have attached to the slide. They stick. You've noticed that when things fall into eosin, they want to attach to the slide, and they seem to stick very well and produce a nice little artifact. Well, these are dandruff flakes. Alicia, click one more time, and they have stuck onto the slide. And dandruff, you can see these cells here. They look like very small cellular structures you'd see in cytology. This is a silver stain. Dandruff will stain with silver. Alicia, click one more time. Not that we needed a silver stain to demonstrate it, but in this particular instance, what we were doing was with silver, and it just so happened that they very nicely demonstrated the dandruff cells. Alicia, click one more time. Okay, it goes to the next slide. Okay, burn tissue. And occasionally your pathologist will say, oh, this tissue is burned. And we get burned tissue from a lot of areas. You can get it from cautery effect in surgery when they would take a hot knife and they would remove tissues from breast or prostate or wherever. It doesn't have to be in a particular location. We've all experienced and seen this. And the dark edges around the tissue are burned. And the nuclei are not very well preserved, obviously. But hematoxylin, whether it be Harris or Gills or Mayers or Weigert's, whoever you're using, but particularly in the elastic stain, we'll use Weigert's, it will outline the burned areas onto the skin. And that's what you're seeing here. Alicia, click one more time and you'll get a higher power of an elastic stain that is showing the outline of the burned tissue there at the very top of the image. So hematoxylin will outline it very nicely. There are other things that we call burned tissue, but it's not. If a section has been processed and cut very thick, and then once it's stained, the nuclei are very dark, that many times gives the pathologist the image of burned tissue, but it really isn't. This is a case where polarization was very helpful. This is an H&E partially polarized. This gauze sponge was accidentally left in the patient, and obviously the area didn't heal, and so they come back to the physician and they open again and find out that a gauze was left in there. These are some of the gauze fibers that appeared in the slide of the tissue. Alicia, click again, and by fully polarization, you can see the gauze fibers line up very nice and white. You can see the individual fibers themselves. So another test of using polarized light for making a diagnosis. This is a section of lung, and although you can't tell anything about this particular section, there are some little areas of white detail there that are pointing to talcum powder. Alicia, click again. And the next image is going to show you some of the polarization in the lung. All of the white areas are talc powder. And Alicia, click another time. And this is on skin section that has got areas of white talcum, particularly on the stratum corneum layer, the outer layer. And Alicia, click again. and this is another case of talcum powder in the lungs. So this is from IV drug users. They use gloves and anything they can find that may have powder in them and debris, and this can get into their lung as they're using their process for administering the drug. Next slide. This is showing some starch powder. On the right, you'll see the H&E, and you'll see, if you look very closely, they're very small, round, oval-shaped objects that they're not nuclei. They're smaller than nuclei, but they're very well appearing there. Then on the left, you see the polarized light. These are starch crystals, and I was sharing with you earlier that in some polarization, they will make the image of a Maltese cross. And if you look kind of in the center, there's a very large, it almost looks like a budding cell, and beneath that and to the right are some of the best images there of a Maltese cross configuration under polarized light. This is artifactual fungi. These were actually some fungi in a cytology preparation. And if you look in the very center of this, and you've got some nice, look like budding fungi, I think this to be Canada, and very nicely outlined with the silver stain. And then as you go down the section, it begins to fade. Alicia, click one more time. But this was fungus growing in the hypo solution and light green solution. See, this is very well laying on top of the section or of the cytology prepared material. It is not in the same plane. Alicia, click again, and you'll be able to see some close-up images of the chain of fungi. So your solutions need to be changed regular, filtered, whatever, so that you don't have this contamination. Next slide. This is a cover slipping gauze, which is very evident. It just got trapped under the cover glass. It's very large. Can easily be taken the cover glass off and nicely removed. I didn't show polarization, but it would polarize should you do that. Next image. I know that we many times like to colorfully decorate our laboratories with plants, which there's nothing wrong with that. When this special stain was done, it was a GMS, and it was in an area that there were some plants hanging very freely, and one of the little nice plant leaves, it was very small, fell off into the Copeland jar, into the silver solution. It wasn't covered, and it stained with the silver. It attached to the tissue section, and then that's what you're getting. So it's not a spider. This many times catches people's attention as to being a spider, but it isn't. It's the plant leaf stained with silver. Next slide. Something that will drive us crazy, particularly in the spring of the year and the fall, but it could be any time, is, well, I'll describe it just a moment. This is a section of skin. The arrow is pointing to these PAS positive objects. Alicia, click again, and we'll see an enlarged image of these objects staining with the Schiff's reagent in the PAS stain. Alicia, click again. And the next image is bringing to a higher power these nice little particles. And you can see they're on the laying on top of the section. They're not in the same plane. And I click one more time, Alicia, and this gives you a very high-powered image of the object with a nice definitive cell wall. These are pollen, our friend pollen, that drives many of us crazy and allergies and whatever. But coming in through the air-conditioned vents, if you had windows, and if for some reason they might be open, any way pollen can get in, it can get in. And if you're hand staining particularly, it could get into your solution and give you this kind of a false positive reading. It looks very much like a fungus, but it is not. But it is PAS positive. Next slide. This is something probably that many of us are dealing with, have dealt with, or may deal with. This is a prostate needle biopsy. The arrow is pointing to some very white areas, particularly around the nucleus, and it will give you the impression of burned tissue. Next slide, Alicia. but it's not. This is used many times, or seen rather, in rapid processing. And this is where the water has not been removed entirely before it's processed and used a form of heat, even if it's a very warm heat, then it will trap water and give this image of burn, but it is not burn. Go to the next slide, Alicia. I think maybe it shows a little more of these white areas, but this water. So if you're using any type of rapid processing and they recommend that you remove the water before, that's what you need to do thoroughly. A few shakes, a few dips, maybe even 5 extra minutes will only help you to achieve this removal of water before processing. Next slide. Then we had someone to send in these images, and I removed them from email, so as I could pass them to you. And I'm in the process of studying them, but I thought I would put them on here and give you at least an opinion of them. And someone here may have a thought as well to help us with this artifact. But everything was followed correctly as the procedure was outlined. It was used in a microwave processor, and they were seeing these white areas. You can see they're pretty much all over the slide. Alicia, go to the next image. And so we're trying to find out what they are and what causes them, how to correct them. And they're there. Alicia, the next image. And they're not consistent. They're throughout the different slides that were sent. They were just in many areas. They weren't the same. They would take the cover glass off and restain them and even recut them, but it appeared to be different areas. Initially, just from what I can offer right now, until I do a little more research, my guess is that probably that is water, just like what I had just shown you. If water is not thoroughly removed from these sections before moving on to a rapid processor, this is something that can occur. I have taken, in some cases, the cover glass off, and I've thoroughly decolorized it with 1% acid alcohol and rinsed well to get the acid off and proceeded with the stain again and stained longer in hematoxylin, and it improved it. That may not be the case in every instance like this, but it's maybe worth a try to experiment with it. But to the person that contributed this, I'm still going to be working on it to help you get an answer. Next slide just shows you some references that you can refer to on some artifacts, and there is a new book out from CAP, College of American Pathologists, on artifacts, and it's a very good book. It's very inexpensive, probably $40 or so, and I would encourage you to go to their website and order it. It's one of the best that we have for artifacts, and so I'm just suggesting that may be something that you want. And this is actually a trichrome stain, as you can see, on a nerve biopsy, and as I looked at this, just happened to capture this little image here. So that is part of our art in histology, isn't it? So at this point, I'm welcome to entertain any questions or thoughts or comments. And before we do depart, I will go ahead and tell you my email address. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have by email if you want. It's Marvin, M-A-R-V-I-N, .Jones at Emory, E-M-O-R-Y, healthcare, it's all one word, .org. Now, if you need to, you're welcome to contact Alicia. I'm sure she could provide you with the email address if you need it. So, what questions may I entertain?
Well, thank you, Lamar. Great presentation, very visual. I'm sure the audience really appreciated it. I do have some questions. One of the questions is nuclear bubbling. You stated it was a formalin fixation issue. How likely is it that this artifact is also caused by microwave processing, or is it always the result of inadequate fixation?
Okay, that's a lot of information there, and may have to do a little more research and answer it. That person is welcome to contact me, but it is something, however, I will tell you, I didn't initially, that it's not thoroughly understood. If you look in any references, you're welcome to go to Carson's book. If you have that, it describes it, I think, better than most. That it is a fixation issue, either not enough time in formalin. There are many variables that they just talk about that they don't know what causes it or how necessarily to correct it. We just know that if they leave it a little longer in formalin, it tends to cure the issue and solve it. It is inadequate fixation, but I'm happy if that person would like to send me that by email. I'll do a little more research to maybe come up with some other answers that helps. I'll be glad to do that.
Thank you. The next question is pale nuclear detail due to heat. How often is this artifact also due to inadequate fixation? And since you're an Express user, I'll go ahead and finish this question, and or Express reagent contamination.
Okay. We are an Express user, and actually that heat artifact that I'm not sure which one they were referring to, but if it was the initial one on the DNC specimen, washed out nuclei, that was in a standard conventional overnight processor. The images that were with the white areas, halo around the nuclei, yes, the initial fixation, and we still use formalin. So to get the formalin off of the tissues in the cassette, we leave it in the either pre-processing solution or pre-processing fixative for 15 minutes. That gets rid of the water. Formalin has water in it. The water has to come out or it gets trapped during the process. We change these processing or their pre-processing solutions. We change those daily, or if you are processing a lot of cassettes, and a lot, I mean like if you had hundreds that you put through there in a day, you may need to change that more often because they're not as forgiving of containing water as maybe alcohols are, but the more you change them, the better. Then you don't have a lot of this contamination. We have two stations. We have one station, we put it in, and then we take it out and after about 10 minutes and leave it in the last one about 15 minutes. So you have a first station, and the second one is a little bit fresher. And then once we put it on the Express, it's in molecular fixative, which is like a transport medium, and that is changed daily. So even though you're using rapid processing, whether it be Express or some of the others out there, your attention to changing these reagents more often is going to be very greatly appreciated in the end result. It can't tolerate a lot of the water that our alcohols and xylenes once did. The reagents for processing in these processors are exactly what it says. They are processing. There isn't any delay in fixation. There isn't any extra time. It's going to move forward and do its job in processing. So the key is maybe record the number of your cassettes that you're running through these pre-processing solutions initially and change it after so many, which is what we do here. We just change ours primarily daily, and we haven't encountered that problem. But it is an artifact, and it's good that you're able to see that so you don't wonder what it is and then have big issues with it. But the key, getting the water out before it goes to the processing step. I hope I've answered that question.
And I don't see any other questions coming in. We did have a thank you, Lamar, from one of our attendees. So,
well,
Lamar?
I'm very happy to do it and very happy to help anyone and answer any questions I can. Feel free to ask.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your time this morning. I hope everybody enjoyed today's webinar.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.